This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. I'm John Shegerian, and this is a wonderful, great edition. It's a USTA edition of the Impact Podcast. We're so lucky to have with us today Amy Choyne. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of the United States Tennis Association. Welcome, Amy, to Impact.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Amy, before we get talking about all the great and fun stuff you and your colleagues are doing at the USTA, can you first share a little bit of your backstory? How did you even get to this position over at the United States Tennis Association?
Sure. It is actually quite a tangled path and not one that most people take. I grew up in a small town in Westchester County and then went to University of Michigan, which is an awesome university, a bit cold. Liberal arts education, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. My parents were kind enough to allow me to explore. Graduated with an art history degree, which is very useful in life, and took a job actually in fashion, working for Talbot's in their product development office in New York. And I worked within fashion and publishing for about over 20 years. Everything from luxury, from Giorgio Armani, to niche like Barney's, to mass like limited brands, Victoria's Secret and Aeropostale and Kenneth Cole. And I really built my career around retail. And retailers, as you probably know so much about their customer base, the way we shop, how to personalize messaging for people. And when the USTA was looking to transform their digital footprint and connection with customers to expand their connection to people playing the sport, they looked outside of the tennis world to see best-in-class people who really have that great connection with customers. And retail was one of the places that they looked in. And I heard about the position. I jumped on it. I have been playing tennis all of my life.
I was going to ask that question. You know I was going to ask that question. So I'm so glad you said that. Okay.
I'd say I don't play with people in the office because a lot of them are ex-professional athletes, or at least collegiate athletes. I took a break in tennis after my highlight of my high school tennis team, and actually just started getting back into it a couple of years ago. I've been going to the U.S. Open since I was 4, every single year with my family. I had a tennis family. So this opportunity looked incredible for me because not only is it supporting the U.S. Open, the fan experience and marketing, I would say the grandest stage in the sport, but it's also the mission of the organization, which is to grow tennis in America. And for someone for 20 plus years that was selling buttons to America, right. Selling sport and health seemed more like a worthwhile career path and more meaningful. So it was a no-brainer for me.
So real essence of all that is people like you with skill set that you have, knowing thy customer. That's a transferable skill set when you want to go and do things in a different direction and take your career path in a different direction. Knowing thy customer and having that ability to hone in is something that's very transferable and gives you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I actually believe so. I always say where people going into marketing, understanding CRM, understanding data segmentation and personalization, and how that entire world works, and balancing obviously that with the creative on how to come up with interesting campaigns tailored to those specific targets is kind of golden in your kind of career growth. And you could transfer that. Obviously, there was a little bit of learning I had to do on the the politics of tennis, and the sport of tennis from a business standpoint. But that's always a learning arch that you have when you join any company.
For our listeners and viewers, we've got Amy Choyne with us today. She's Chief Marketing Officer of the United States Tennis Association. To find Amy and her colleagues and all the great work they're doing at the United States Tennis Association, go to www.usta.com or usopen.org. Amy, where is tennis today? Where was it before the pandemic? And then how did the pandemic affect the sport of tennis? And how are you now coming out of it with regards to science winning this tragic period that we all had to live through around the world? And how are you coming out of it? And how do you foresee it as you evolve out of this pandemic period?
Yeah, so tennis for many years had seen a decline.
Right.
It had its heyday in the '80s. They always like to say, and then there was a decline, a little bit of a flatness, especially in youth. So a couple years ago, we put a lot of energy in working on a youth brand that was more of an umbrella for the sport called Net Generation.
Okay.
Which really combated some myths about youth tennis, which is it has to be competitive, it's an individual sport, it's not accessible, it's not fun, and we really are trying to position it as more playful, not only for kids but also for adults,
Right.
and that anyone from any size, age, race, gender, could play the sport. And it's more accessible now than it has been in many years. The pandemic and COVID specifically, thank goodness we're, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for
Right.
so many reasons, actually was quite good to tennis. And tennis and golf, they were both quite good at because both outside sports.
Mm.
And naturally COVID safe because you could be socially distant.
Right.
Especially when it comes to singles.
Mm.
So we actually saw an increase in participation in tennis. Year over year, it was up about 44%.
Wow.
And we saw about 3 million new players come into the game. And then racket sales itself were up about 22% and 40% within the youth market, which means more people are, picking up rackets and learning the sport. And within those racket sales, a lot of them are beginner rackets. So
interesting. Now it's getting really interesting about knowing thy customer. Now I see how you're following all these different data points in the algorithm, and you're able to track growing flat versus negativity. You're able to see how you're growing the sport then.
yes, I mean, we track it in the data that we have about participation, but there's also a PAC study on all sports that is independent that allows us access to those numbers.
Growing up in Queens, so it basically in the shadow of Forest Hills, and then of course close to where City Field is and where the Open is always held now. After cycled out of Forest Hills, that's how old I am. Tennis was a big deal. I mean, you can imagine when you're in Queens, you're the heart of, you're basically in your mind at the heart of tennis. And then also we had all these legends, not only Billie Jean King, but we also had Andre Agassi, and we had Pete Sampras, and all these wonderful, wonderful icons back then. Talk a little bit about growing the game and who is your real competition. When I was growing up, soccer wasn't a big deal. Is soccer and golf now, because of the rise of Tiger, a lot of the competition, or is it just competition versus yourself in terms of educating your potential customers?
I think there's a lot of competition there. I think soccer is one of the more competitive sports for us, just from a youth perspective, because it, naturally evokes teamwork when parents are looking where they want their kid to get involved with. Whereas we have to educate kind of what are the attributes and benefits of tennis to parents, that it promotes teamwork, it promotes social skills and sportsmanship and coordination and agility and balance and strategic thinking. And there's, a wide range of benefits. And it's also a lifetime sport where, I don't know about
Right.
your circle. I don't know that many soccer players that I'm
Oh,
friends with, whereas I know a lot of adult tennis players.
right.
Play, for the rest of your life. And extreme benefits as you go through all those stages. So I think soccer is, one. I think sadly, esports and the phone
Oh,
is probably the biggest competition we have right now. And it's like, using the word pandemic, it's a pandemic in America where kids are just less active. So we, actually work with a bunch of different sports. And there's something called the American Development Model. And we promote that at a certain age, you really also shouldn't just do one sport. You should not specialize just in tennis or just in baseball.
right.
You should do a bunch of different sports to make sure that youth and kids are more balanced and from a skill set standpoint.
So I didn't even think of that. So esports is even a big a competitor. You're fighting against that, the inertia that those kids are having fun playing esports, but they're really just sitting on couches.
They're really just sitting on couches. I mean, if you'd ask my son, he would rather play, something on the computer than, get out and play soccer.
Okay, that's interesting because my children are much older than your son. How old is your son?
I started late. So my son is 7 and my daughter's 2.5. And sadly, they
That's
are
sweet. Those
both
are great ages.
great ages, but they're both addicted to their respective iPads,
Wow.
which is probably my fault as a mother, but people do what they have to do when they work from home with COVID. So
So talk about that. Let's just talk about the marketing in your own household. And I understand that. I mean, all the people that I work with, their children are the same. They're on iPads and they love their games. So how do you evolve your own children to still enjoy the technology that exists and all the benefits of technology, but they also get them outside to do something outside like tennis? How does that work in your own household?
Well, my own household, I strongly believe in modeling. I recently started, taking a class actually at the Billie Jean King Center for Tennis.
Oh,
At the
great.
same time, I bring my son for his tennis class. So
Got it.
he sees that I'm doing it. So he wants to do it. So I think that is incredibly important.
Right.
There also are technologies now that kind of merge the two. There you could. I had just bought my nephew some dribbling game with a basketball
Ah,
in which is connected to the iPad that actually, evaluates if you're, if you're dribbling consistently. So, that's also a bridge that many sports are playing with as well.
that's so interesting. So the mixture of technology with the actual analog sport itself is a way of bridging young or youth over.
Yes.
That's really cool. Talk about icons. Again, I grew up with all. I mean, then I'm thinking back, not only Billie Jean King, but Martina Navratilova and Steffi Graf, and who's your next Tiger Woods? And who's your next icon that are emerging? Unfortunately, the Williams sisters are on probably the back half of their careers now. Unbelievable careers and wonderful ambassadors of the sport and icons of athletics overall. But where do you go next? Where do you foresee the next icons evolving?
It's an interesting question from an American standpoint, especially coming off such a time where social injustice was, pretty, right there out in the open and in the news, and injected in what every sports organization did last year, inclusive of us.
Right.
People that are not only rising on the court but rising as voices within tennis are people like Coco Gauff, are people like Naomi Osaka, are people like Francis Tiafo. Probably less vocal on the social front, but doing great on the court. Dominic Thiem, people like that. I mean, these are names that we've been watching pretty
Right.
hawk-like.
I was happy Coco won, I think, twice last weekend or something of that
Yes,
nature, because my granddaughter's name is Coco and she's only one, but I'm thinking this is my way of bridging her in. You're going to follow the Coco trend here. I
that's
mean,
awesome.
I'm just trying to think of every which way to get, like you said, kids away from TV and from the gaming stuff. So the big question, which of course everyone wants to know, Amy, is the U.S. Open. Are people going to be going this year?
Yep, absolutely. So, last year, as you know, we did pull off the U.S. Open. And when I say pull off, it was Herculean.
Right.
There was so many different scenario plannings, and thankfully we did it in a safe environment, and we did it with three things in mind. Can we do it in a fiscally responsible way? Is it good for the sport? And is it safe for our players, our internal team, as well as fans, if they were going to come? Fans did not come, but we did do it. This year, we are planning to have fans and welcome them back. We started the planning with a 25% capacity. Now we're already up to a 50% capacity. If I had a magic wand, I would make it 100% capacity. I think it'll probably be somewhere in between 50% and 100%, but we're really partnering with, Governor Cuomo's team on that to see, what the limitations are, and then working with our operations team to figure out how to do that in a safe environment. But as you know, the world, knock on wood, is quickly coming back. You being a New Yorker too, Broadway's opening up. I just saw
Right.
Moulin Rouge is selling tickets for September. So I think we're in a sweet spot of when it will be safe. And we are an outdoor event as well. So we
Right.
have that going for us.
So it's funny, I told my wife last night that I was interviewing you today, and we were talking about some of the more timely sports things that are now upon us. Let me ask you their question, because we were debating last night this issue. So do you think the Olympics should happen this year?
It's a tough one.
Tough one.
That's a tough one. I mean, I haven't heard the recent reports from Tokyo, but I know, the last I read up on it, they were concerned, about, the restrictions there. I know from our athletes that, we're sending, there are extreme restrictions that they can only be in the village, in their hotels. You can't really, go out in Tokyo. It's going to be a bubble. I think it is a risk, a global risk. So it is obviously up to them on the calculation of if that risk is worth it.
Right. I mean, of course, we all love sports. We'd all love to see the sport go on. But then last night, Bloomberg reported, this was just recent from last night, that 84% of the Japanese population doesn't want it to happen because they're worried themselves about super spreader events and things of that such. So it's just so hard culturally, socially, economically, to balance those interests. I mean, the sports world is big business now. So as you know, you're in the middle of it. So it's just so fascinating to try to figure out how to do things and do things the right way.
I know it's a crazy time right now. Australia had a similar predicament when they did the Australian Open. The Australians in Melbourne did not want them to come, because of the super spreader. There was, I think, a multiple, lawsuits going on. In the end, they did it safely. They had to shut down for a little while. Hopefully it'll be much smoother for them this year in January, but we all have to, tread lightly and figure out how to do this in the safest way as possible.
And for those listeners and viewers that just joined us, we've got Amy Choyne with us today. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of the United States Tennis Association. To find Amy, her colleagues, and all the great work they're doing, please go to www.usta.com or usopen.org. Amy, your specialty, as you said at the top of the show, is knowing thy customer. And you came out of retail with a lot of great experience. There's a lot of young viewers and listeners of this podcast that love sports and want to become sports executives. Talk a little bit about your skill set that you learned in terms of knowing thy customer. And for those youth out there that want to get involved in the sports organizations, whether NFL, NBA, tennis, whatever, how your skills are so important to having opportunities to become involved in the big business of sports.
There's multiple ways you can get involved in sports. Obviously, I come from a holistic marketing approach,
Right.
Which is very heavy on content and development of content to these specific targets and ticket sales and fan engagement. There's a whole different world of marketing also that you can get involved in called partnership marketing or SponCon, and that is working with more of the business of sport marketing, in which you are negotiating sponsorships with the US Open or with the USTA. And integrating them into the fabric of the brand for the sponsors. I still work on that from, being the brand liaison or brand cop, as one might call me. But those negotiations is more quote unquote the business of it. So there's multiple kind of ways that you could, get involved, in the industry itself. And that path leads more to like a chief revenue officer and ticketing and hospitality and that whole entire world. My world, as I said, I think knowing your customer at the heart of it is incredibly important, and that comes from also understanding traditional as well as new media approaches of how to engage the customers, whether it's through social media or CRM, or social media, as I said, is probably one of the biggest things to always keep on top of, especially because it's ever evolving.
So you were an art history major, so you learned your skill sets on the job in terms of social media, traditional marketing versus new media marketing.
Um, yes, I was an art history major. Then when I started working, I actually went back to school at Parsons.
Sure.
For graphic design,
Yeah,
because I also run all of creative services. I like to say my mind is analytical and creative. I think it is a good balance for my position, because I could kind of manage both. Social media didn't exist when I was in college.
Right.
Nor did email. I'm a little older, if you could believe that. I still can't believe that we didn't have email back then.
Right.
And I had like one of those really big computers, like the old Mac Classic. So I learned that on the job. I absolutely did.
So interesting. I always talk to people about the striking a balance in their position, and you have an interesting position where you have a creative brain, but also an analytical brain too, given your art background and your metrics background in terms of knowing thy customer. So on a day-to-day basis, are you doing more managing or making? And how do you balance the blessings and the burdens of having to do both, probably in where you sit?
It's a good question. I think I do a bit of both. I think I know enough about the metrics and the digital infrastructure and technology to be dangerous, but also know what I don't know, and have a wonderful team that is under my chief technology officer, that are my partners in creating my vision.
Got it.
So, and then from a creative side, I have my in-house creative people, and also agencies, ad hoc agencies that kind of help us as well. So, unfortunately, when you become in a managerial role, sometimes you're not necessarily the doer, but more kind of steering the ship on the vision.
Got it. Makes sense. Hey, when I was young, the big schools, the big tennis academies had a big role in getting the excitement going of tennis and the competitiveness with America's youth, like Nick's school down in Florida and those kind of places. Does that still exist? And is that waxing or waning? And is that going to further assist you to get America's youth playing tennis more again?
No, that still exists. Those schools still exist. We also have a pretty robust player development team at our Orlando campus. We built a campus about 3 years ago. It has about 100 courts down in Orlando. It's where our headquarters is. We also have a headquarters up in White Plains, which I'm based. We are definitely grooming the next Americans to come out. The question is, do you need an American icon to increase participation in America? Is always an interesting question. I'm not sure you do. I mean, I could, look at someone like Roger and Rafa and be, in awe, and, want to train like them. So I think it is, tennis, unlike the other sports in America, it's a global brand, and it is 365 days a year. There is always something going on from a tournament. That's why COVID was, so tragic for the sport, because, there was no tennis for a while. But the WTA and ATP and the slams did some interesting content in between.
Amy, it's wonderful having you on today. I want to give you the last word before we have to sign off for the day. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for doing the great work that you do, because we know it's a healthier America. The more people are moving around, the more people that are playing sports, the more youth and then adults play tennis, the healthier they'll be. And I just want to thank you for making the world a better and healthier place. But I want to give you the last word as well.
No, thank you for that. Well, thank you for having me on this. It's been a pleasure. Tennis is a wonderful sport with so many benefits. I think that people feel that it's hard to get into, hard to find a player. But please, come on usda.com, check out our site. There's tools to get you into the game, and from technology to activities to do at home with your kids. So we welcome everyone into the sport. It's a great sport for life.
Amy, continued success, and you're always welcome back on the Impact Podcast.
Thank you.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking platform revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With thousands of athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent, for speeches, custom experiences, live streams, and much more. For more information on Engage or to book talent today, visit letsengage.com.